So I'm really here to talk to you today, kind of about not so much that where I've landed at AID. This is the be all and end all place to be if you're contemplating a career in international development. It's just one of many endpoint possibilities. I guess the real important thing is the journey I took. It's the adventure, and I'll just try to use some examples from my life of certain types of very different ways you can get involved in getting employment opportunities if you're really interested in pursuing international development work. I won't talk too much technical stuff about what we're doing at AID right now in my current position. I got a feeling my talk is way too long. I'm going to have to find some miraculous way to cut it down and leave at least 10 minutes for discussion. But if I don't have much time at the end, apparently there's a beer drinking get together later, and you can pound me with questions over the bar. So the first part is I was very much in the position where many of you were many years ago. I had this intense internal passion to do international work. I wanted to kind of find a path towards making an important contribution in the lives of people in the lower income countries. When I first went into college, I didn't have any concept of that at the end of the day it would be agriculture that would be that journey for me. But one thing led to another, and when I was in an ag school and starting to pursue a technical area of agriculture, my chosen field was plant pathology. I'd heard a lot about USAID and the World Bank and FAO, but pretty much blind and naive, I just kind of plowed ahead in my master's, my PhD work, and just tried to learn as much as I could along the way. But when I look back, I realized I knew so little about how it all works back then, and now I guess I know a lot more. So I'm just hopefully this encounter with me will answer some of your questions and raise some red flags for you, those of you who are interested in pursuing an international career, because there are lots of twists and turns. But for me, it all started during my PhD. The first opportunity I had to do some international work abroad, I really fought hard for it. I tried to get some international work based in my master's program, and I almost did, but it didn't quite work out. But I'm just saying that if during your undergrad, master's, or PhD, if you can get some kind of an international experience under your belt as part of your academic work, great. Or if not, a Peace Corps experience or a Rotary fellowship, or even doing missionary type work in a developing country. It all counts. It's all important that you've got out there and taken a chance at interacting with people in foreign places and trying to help solve their problems. So for me, as part of my PhD, I got a USAID backed grant to go work at Embrapa, the soybean research center in Brazil. Spent a year doing my research there. I replicated a lot of the work I was doing in Illinois. I did lab work, greenhouse work, field work, but the most important thing really was not so much the actual thesis material. It was adapting to the local culture. It was adapting to my scientific colleagues. I was just kind of like a punk graduate student at one of the outstanding research centers in Brazil, and I had to essentially listen and learn and interact with my colleagues, not just stay in my own silo and do my own thing. I was doing seed pathology work in soybeans, but I had to go around the research facility and ask, so what is the entomologist doing? What is the breeder doing? What is the soybean economist doing? I could just easily have just stayed in my niche and done my seed pathology work, but that wouldn't have given me as much of an enriching experience. So but the hugely important thing was to do some of my research off of the station and go into real Brazilian soybean farmer fields and do my research with them. And what you quickly find out is, you're a graduate student and you're in a foreign land and you're at a research station, but now you have to convince, a soybean farmer in Brazil to allow you to do your work in his land. And he's going to ask you, so why in the hell do you want to, are you going to be wasting my time? Are you going to be helping me out? What's your purpose of working with me? And you have to have a good explanation and answer for all that. And of course, I had to have good enough Portuguese that I could interact with the farmer. So in this case, you see one of the tall guys, the technician, and the short guy is actually my supervisor in Brazil, and then the farmer's the guy on the tractor. And so part of the whole research experience was I had to convince several of farmers like this to allow me to do their research on their land. And so here you see here's my research plots embedded in the middle of a commercial soybean field in Brazil. My message here is get off the research station and get out into the real world with farmers, no matter what you do. I learned a lot of key learnings from this whole experience. Teamwork, as I mentioned, working with the whole soybean team, not just the plant pathology side of it. Having a curiosity in what my other colleagues were doing, developing social skills with my colleagues and also with the farmers. The importance of being off the farm, and essentially it's not so much at the end of the day about the actual degree that you get. It's really what you're going to do with the degree that matters. So I'm almost saying that the technical in terms of the long-term value of the experience, it's not about the data and the thesis and comparing your Illinois results with the results that I got in Brazil. It was more the personal interactions and developing the skills with people in foreign countries as a scientist. The next opportunity I had to work overseas was my first job as a postdoc, and I worked in the CGIAR system. The mission of the CGIAR is essentially to do sustainable food security and poverty reduction through scientific research in fields such as agriculture and forestry and fisheries, etc. I think you're all aware of international centers like CIMMYT, CIAT, and IRRI. I would still say that looking at the world today, the opportunity to do an entry-level postdoc position at one of these centers is one of the best possible ways you can get involved in international development. I'm going to skip this slide. It basically tells you what these research centers do. So my first opportunity was to work as a postdoc in the wheat program in CIMMYT, the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement. I worked on the barley team and the wheat team. I was a plant pathologist, and essentially I just had to park my PhD at the door. All they cared about really at CIMMYT was breeding. This was due to all the Borlaugian DNA at the place. So you essentially, in order to become really a valuable contributor to what was going on at CIMMYT, I had to kind of almost forget about my plant pathology for a while and really focus on learning breeding. Because you form part of a multidisciplinary plant germplasm improvement team. So your role as a pathologist is kind of minimized by the higher priority roles of the breeders. So I had to spend the first 6 months of my term there just doing a lot of what might be kind of perceived as drudgery type work, inoculating plots night and day, walking the rows with these accomplished CIMMYT scientists who and tagging plants that had high potential for certain breeding purposes. I mean, these guys were so good that they didn't even need to check the label sometimes at the front of a row of germplasm. They knew it by heart just by looking at the architecture of the plant, its reacting to certain diseases, and I realized that I had to become good enough that I could walk with these people in the field. My advisor there was actually a disciple of Norman Borlaug, and in that time, which is in the mid 80s, Dr. Borlaug would come and visit our plots, and I just kind of tagged along behind my advisor and Dr. Borlaug as they walked through my advisor's plots, and I just tried to pick up by osmosis some of the good stuff they were talking about, but I kind of kept my mouth shut and just walked behind them. But it was a real privilege to be able to walk the plots with Dr. Borlaug and my advisor. Packaging up all the seed, organizing all the seed from the research plots. This was, we had some technicians, but actually, the postdocs had to get involved in all this work themselves. This is essentially the treasure that you're after. This is the objective, a highly resistant kind of disease-resistant material that is also high yielding and has other kind of attributes such as, climate resiliency, ability to grow in aluminum toxic soils or saline soils. But as a plant pathologist, I was making my contribution in the area of trying to get, germplasm that was highly disease resistant. The next position I was able to have was at a more advanced position in another CGIAR center, which is CIAT, the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, and based in Cali, Colombia. I became a senior research fellow. I was able to have more of my own program and do work that was a little bit less on the drudgery side. I worked in the bean program at CIMMYT. In particular, they had a Central American bean program, a regional program that was based in Costa Rica. So that's where I was based as a plant pathologist, and my task was to lead this fight we had against this one particular disease in Central America called web blight. It's a fungal disease. The propagules are in the soil, and during the heavy tropical rains, they are splashed up on the leaf, and they just decimate the bean crop. The objective of my work therefore was to develop an integrated control program to defeat this disease in Central America. Again, it was a team effort with breeders and agronomists. This shows you just the available kind of resistance and tolerance if you look at a susceptible line versus some of the more tolerant lines. But we couldn't find anything that was truly resistant. So you have to mix in whatever level of disease tolerance you can through the genetics. You combine that with cultural control, such as using rice straw and other types of mulch, so you prevent the pathogen from jumping up onto the leaves during the tropical rainstorms and then initiating their attack. You experiment with row spacings and planting density to find the ideal combination that keeps the disease from spreading in the plot, because this has ramifications about humidity and the ability of the fungus to spread in between the plots. So you find the ideal planting densities and row spacings. You can also combine part of the package with climbing beans, and climbing beans can often escape the severe attack initially, and then the farmer can get a good crop. In any case, we developed a whole package of control, which also included maybe 1 or 2 sprays of benlate, but farmers were typically spraying 10 or more times, and you mix in all this cultural control, you could greatly reduce the chemical sprays to beat the fungus. Again, we did all our work in Costa Rica on farmers' fields, nothing on experiment stations. So we had to go out, find farmers where there was naturally, endemic high levels of high levels of inoculum and do our breeding work and our cultural control work on the farm with farmers. And then once we had an integrated control package, we defined it, we put it together, and we essentially marketed it throughout the other bean growing countries in Central America like Guatemala and Honduras and Dominican Republic. Key learnings from all this work with the CGIAR: all the work is teamwork, and you're an advanced scientist. You're coming out of a U.S. elite program in agriculture. Forget about it. You're going to be bending over, spraying, inoculating all the time with your local country counterparts. Maybe these days the emphasis is more on publication from the CG centers, but back when I was doing this, publication was kind of a luxury. You had the task at hand was improved. Getting on part of a team that would have a multidisciplinary approach to improving improved germplasm that essentially would allow farmers to grow a crop under these difficult conditions of disease pressure. Another important lesson, learning that I learned with these international centers is it's in all this work that I'm talking about, the teamwork. It's not just within the CGIAR Center scientists. All the time we did our work in close cooperation with national scientists. So scientists from the ministries of agriculture would accompany all of our work. They would provide input into the work. When we made selections, they would be alongside us. Because at the end of the day, they're the best lines that come out of the program should be of total acceptance to the locals. It shouldn't be the CIMMYT or the CIAT scientists that drive the final decisions on the elite germplasm, which lines of germplasm should go into the national programs. It's the national program scientists who have to work with you from the very start. You have to build them in from the beginning. And I got a bullet point here about the Borlaug mentality. Kind of don't ever forget who you're working for. You're working for the people in these countries, the poor farmers who, if they continue to plant what they have against the problem, they're not going to succeed. So you have to be really driven about improving their outcome, or you kind of have to get out of this line of work. And it's again, I think it's a Borlaugian principle. It's kind of like this is not just a job. This at a certain point you realize it's a privilege to be doing this kind of work with talented scientists in all these different locations around the world. It's not just a job. It really is a true privilege. Another opportunity that I never knew about when I was wanting to get into the world of international development was all the opportunities that if you had some experience in developing countries, you had a good science background, that there were many multinational food companies out there looking for people like you. And what it all gets down to is agricultural raw material procurement. These companies, whether it's like Frito-Lay, which is the company I worked for initially, or McDonald's, or ConAgra, Starbucks, Dole, Kraft, Nestle, they all need consistent supply of raw material throughout the year. And it's very hard to get this in some of these developing country markets where they're trying to set up operations. They have to get the lowest possible price they can, but the highest possible quality. So it's a real challenge to set up agricultural supply chains that can do all this. So after all my experiences with these international centers, doing pretty much kind of applied science, I had an opportunity to work with the international division of Frito-Lay in their potato procurement program. So the whole idea of these big companies is brand marketing. In the case of Frito-Lay, Doritos corn chips, Ruffles potato chips, Cheetos. Global branding is what kind of drives the entire agricultural procurement teams, because at the end of the day, that bag of Ruffles potato chips that you would get here in College Station, they want that to taste exactly the same way as a bag of potato chips that they're producing in their operation in South Korea. So in order to get that kind of consistency, it so much depends on the agricultural raw material procurement team. And this is whether it's it's a bag of Ruffles potato chips, or if it's a McDonald's quarter pounder, or if it's your latte at Starbucks. It all gets down to sourcing consistent agricultural raw material. So this is kind of the holy grail in the world of chip stock potatoes. This is one of the operations in Mexico for Frito-Lay. This is like the shape, the size, the sugar content, everything is just right with this potato. This is the perfect potato, and in order to get it, I mean, it's easy enough to get it in the Frito-Lay U.S. operations. But when you're trying to get this kind of potato in Mexico or Thailand or Korea or Cambodia or someplace like that, it's a huge challenge. And so essentially you are combining your ability, everything you've learned in science with hands-on problem solving in terms of all the problems you're going to encounter in the supply chain to get that consistent result. There's just a myriad of problems. So you have to become very practically minded. And as I worked with Frito-Lay around the world, just to show you some quick slides of the kind of this uniformity that you come up against. So when we first started operations in Korea, this was one of the typical farmer who was supplying the Frito-Lay operations in Korea initially. This was a harvest in Korea early on in the program. Of course, this would be a harvest of potatoes in the Frito-Lay operations in Idaho. This kind of contrast. This was delivering potatoes to the factory in Frito-Lay Thailand operations. And this is delivering potatoes to the factory in the factory in Illinois of Frito-Lay. This is a typical planting in Alabama at the time of Frito-Lay seed potatoes. And this is a typical planting early on in our turkey operations. Frito-Lay operation in Florida. This is how they're applying pesticides. And when we went into the Dominican Republic, this is how those folks were applying pesticides. You see all these extreme levels of disuniformity that need to be corrected. This was a harvest in the Frito-Lay Italy operations, and then on the right, how they harvest potatoes in the initial operations we had in China. Harvesting in Turkey, harvesting in Mexico, different equipment, different types of ridges, different types of soils. You've got to bring consistency to all this. When we first started sourcing potatoes in Turkey for the Frito-Lay operations there, we had to actually store the potatoes in caves in the winter throughout the harsh winter in Turkey. And for the first year or two, we tried to do that because that was the local custom, but it just didn't work out. So at the end of the day, we had to build a sophisticated potato storage in the middle of Turkey. And myself, as a plant pathologist, I was heavily involved in all this. You become a jack of all trades, become part of the team, because this potato storage structure is essentially becoming the receiving station and the caretaking station for all of the product coming out of your potato supply efforts. And at the end of the day, this was the finished facility in Turkey. I spent months at that place. The other huge problem in potato production around the world in an operation like Frito-Lay is getting the proper seed to start with. Sometimes you can imagine that an operation like Frito-Lay has its own proprietary varieties, which it does. But oftentimes we can't use those varieties. We have to depend on seed coming from Holland or Germany or France or Australia in order to get the job done in certain countries. But when seed from those programs is not allowed into the country, then we had to essentially bring in tissue culture of our own proprietary varieties, get that started in the country. And then you get into mini tuber programs developed in glass houses and eventually screen houses. So those last three slides I showed you was how we got started in China, because China just wouldn't let any seed anywhere come in. You had to start with in vitro plantlets, and everything you did, you had to have a Chinese local business partner as part of the deal, or they wouldn't let you essentially start business. The next opportunity I had to work with a multinational was a multinational potato company based in the Philippines. They wanted to be like Frito-Lay, and they were starting to feel pressure from importation of Frito-Lay product into the Philippines. So this company, URC, it's the largest snack food company in the Philippines. They had 8 potato processing plants, some in China, some in Malaysia, Indonesia. They were the largest local buyer of raw potato in the Philippines, and potato chips were their kind of leading flagship line. And they had generally 60% market share in the country, but that market share was falling because imported product from Frito-Lay, for example, was manufactured in Hong Kong and in Australia was coming in and essentially robbing them of their market share. And essentially the Filipinos were getting more acquired taste for the imported stuff. So the problem was how to upgrade this operation. The company hired me to essentially improve the quality of their potato procurement such that they could compete with the imported finished product of Frito-Lay and other companies. The problem was the raw material they were using in the Philippines was just totally inappropriate for potato chips processing. You can compare to those other slides I showed you. This is what we were dealing with. And of course, remember, this is the Holy Grail, and there's quite a difference. The main problem was that in the Philippines, the potato sourcing area up here in Benguet province is considerable distance between the manufacturing operations in Manila. And this is you've probably heard about all the typhoon activity that comes in and hits the Philippines. So for about 4 months of the year, trying to source potatoes out of here is just absolute hell. The roads wash out, potatoes become, whacked with tropical diseases. So for 4 months, you essentially don't have hardly any good potato supply at all. So they wanted a year-round supply that could compete with the imported product. This is the typical topography in that northern Filipino area. You didn't have nice broad fields of potatoes to work with. A lot of this was, at high altitude, small plots, terraces. Very difficult to get potatoes out of there. You had to work with brokers. You didn't have farmers kind of dedicated to you. This big company had to buy potatoes on the open market through brokers. So it was my job. I had to go there as the agriculture director and find a new place to grow potatoes for the company. To make a long story short, we scoured the entire country, which is, it's an island country, and we found that we thought the highest potential would be to source these potatoes in Mindanao at the base of this Mount Kitanglad watershed area. So in order to get to this rolling terrain where we could grow potatoes in a more sophisticated fashion, we had to initially go through Dole and Damontay pineapple fields at about 400 meters, and then we'd hit these potato fields at about 800 or 1,000 meters, and we couldn't go any farther because these were protected areas that were above us. So this is the area where in Mindanao Island where we felt we had a lot of potential to grow potatoes kind of in a much more sophisticated fashion. And you can tell there's quite a difference here in terms of trying to this distance seems short, but this particular province, the key is that you can grow potatoes there year round. This whole area is essentially typhoon free the entire year. So you can plant potatoes almost every month and harvest potatoes every month. That was the plan. And the model I kind of developed there was not a typical corporate farming model. We didn't want to have our own corporate company farms. We wanted to source potatoes from smallholders on kind of an outgrower basis. We wanted to have kind of an open, transparent process where we brought in government, we brought in local universities, we brought in international research centers like the International Potato Center, and this was to be a project that would essentially benefit the small farmer livelihoods and build a connection between a big, private sector company, a food processor, and small farmers. That was kind of that was my DNA. That's where I had come from, and that's the kind of model I wanted for this particular company, and that's the model that I pursued. So this was the public-private sector partnership in many ways. And the private sector side of it was the buyer, the company, URC, the processor, and then we involved multinational seed companies and then sea freight companies. So the whole key to this operation was to bring in certified seed, high quality certified seed from outside the Philippines, that this was seed that would give you a very high quality kind of potato that was similar to what Frito-Lay was able to use in their operations. In the public sector side of it, there was USAID projects in place there on Mindanao. There were Australian aid projects. The International Potato Center was there. The federal government was highly interested. The local government was interested. Local universities were interested. And we involved everybody in this project. So it was a full and open, transparent type of supply chain project that we thought would essentially be really good for the Mindanao economy and smallholder development. The huge problem we had initially was that the quarantine and customs officers in the Philippines would not let us bring in seed potato from anywhere. They had these rules on the books. They made claims that, well, you'd be bringing in soil on these potatoes. The soil could have nematodes, it could have bacterial wilt. The Philippines already had all these problems in their soils already. So we had to put up this argument to fight off this very archaic notion from the customs and the quarantine people. And essentially, we were just lucky because at the same time our project was trying to launch, the federal government launched a high-value commercial crops program, and essentially that program trumped these archaic worries and concerns of the quarantine people. So eventually, we were able to bring in high-quality seed from outside countries. We were able to bring in Australian seed part of the year, U.S. and European seed in different times of the year. And then there was a couple of months where we couldn't source seed from anywhere, and we had to have a local seed program. So this kind of work, you can imagine. I've had all these experiences in university and at the international centers. So now I was essentially trying to bring in seed from wintry environments like this in Wisconsin all the way to a tropical environment like the Philippines. So essentially, seed was being stored in Wisconsin in February. It would make a journey. So it would go to the port in Long Beach, be shipped to Manila. That would take 4 to 6 weeks under refrigerated conditions, be offloaded in Manila. The quarantine people agreed to the seed coming in, but they had to inspect it. And every time they inspected one of our containers, the price was, 20 or so bags of seed would disappear. It was just part of the process to enable this to happen. But in any case, we invited the quarantine people to at all times follow all the field trials we were doing so they could see that that national potato production was not being threatened by the importation of these different types of seeds from other countries. So from Manila, then the potatoes were put on a passenger ferry, taken down to Mindanao, offloaded, and the company set up, more sophisticated, sturdy storage areas. The seed was offloaded, distributed to farmers. The farmers had to display an ability to essentially, they had to have structures where they could chit the seed or germinate, sprout the seed before planting. I've got a bunch of slides here showing the different obligations of the farmers and the different obligations of the company. The basic story here was that bringing in imported seed from the U.S. or Australia at the end of the day, was 50% of the cost of production for the crop. Just the landed cost of the seed. So the company provided that. But what we represented to the farmer was a guaranteed market. All the crop that they could produce from the seed, we would guarantee to buy it at kind of an agreed upon price that was set before harvest. But the farmers, and then we provided technical assistance to our agronomic advisors to the farmers so they could get the most yield out of the crop. So we taught the farmers to prepare the land properly in Mindanao. Sometimes they used tractors, the more well-off farmers, but other times they used animal traction. Oftentimes the tractor would be breaking down, but the animal could keep going, so it wasn't necessarily an advantage to have a Ford tractor on Mindanao. Planting was always done manually, generally by women farmers, difficult, time-consuming. This is what the crop would look like typically at 45 days after planting, at 60 days after planting. manual weeding, manual hilling, and then flowering, and then harvest. To make a long story short, then we graded the product and we shipped it back to Manila from that in non-refrigerated conditions to the factories. And we're able to supply a quality raw material to the factories here. And we found out through research that we didn't need to use refrigerated container transport, which greatly reduced the landed price. So although it looks like this was the easy sourcing, like it's very hard to believe that this long distance inter-island shipping would work. It actually did. But it took a lot of research. I'm going to skip through these farms. This is some of the technical, for these slides, some of the technical assistance we provided to the farmers on the company side of it. Lots, when we bought, for example, Dutch seed, the Dutch seed agronomists would come and provide technical assistance to the growers, teach them the best ways to produce, to grow their potatoes. This is kind of just phenotypic variation between a Dutch seed marketer and some of our Filipino agronomists. There's no illusion there. That's really. This is when we brought in Australian seed, then the Australian government would provide technical assistance to come and work with the farmers. And so the company provided all that help in order to get the technical assistance to the farmers so they had the best chance of growing the crop. The big problems in the whole scheme were leaf roll virus and bacterial wilt. All I'll say is that this was mainly a problem for the local seed production aspects. Because if we could bring in the certified seed and grow one crop, we can multiply that once and then distribute that seed to the farmers, and they could get the seed at half the cost. But the local seed production was extremely difficult because of these two diseases. The farmers just weren't good enough to keep it out of their system. You look at the two potatoes on the left, and they look perfectly normal, but when you cut them, this is bacterial wilt just going to town on the vascular system in the potato, and you can't make any kind of potato chip out of that. So this was a huge, hidden problem that I had to deal with. And these are many of the farmers I worked with, and it was just incredible working with these Filipino farmers. So key learnings from this whole private sector experience. You can combine, you don't have to set up corporate farming operations to supply, a big, private sector food processing operation. You can work with smallholders in a development context. Private sector always high reward for risk-taking, out-of-the-box thinking. The whole idea to transport the potatoes all that way without refrigeration was kind of a gamble, but at the end of the day it worked. And then essentially the importance of, we had to do a lot of research and development before this project really kicked off. And so, science and research investigation played a role in this, mainly through a lot of variety trials and this kind of thing. Now I'm going to spend a little time talking about the next experience in my career had to do with getting involved on USAID projects, but from the consultancy side. I think one of my key areas of naivete when I was in graduate school heard so much about AID projects was I always thought kind of AID people did AID projects in terms of the field implementation on the ground. Maybe most of you in the room know by now that AID, essentially, we work through a series of contracting. In most of our development work, we contract out with consultancy firms. Many of them are located in the Washington area, and they're affably named Beltway Bandits. But these are highly professional firms that know exactly what AID wants. And so there's this whole system that works where we put out proposals, and these firms respond to proposals and essentially implement. There's intense competition to win the projects, and these firms deliver proposals. We judge the proposals, and then they go and implement the work, and we monitor their work. So these firms essentially respond to RFPs coming from USAID. They design projects for us. If it's one of the best ways to get involved in USAID work is to get on the radar of these companies. There's DAI, Chemonics, APT, Winrock, ARD, ACDI, VOCA. These are just some of the names you have to know about. And if there's also agricultural programs that are run by not-for-profits, such as organizations such as CARE, Save the Children, World Vision. To learn about all these different players in the game, you have to go. The one-stop shop is this DevX website. Just Google DevX and go there, and you can see all the opportunities that these projects have. So, if you're interested in employment and with AID and getting used to AID projects, you have to get on the radar of these firms. And you can get in at the internship level. You can become a junior or a senior development specialist, where you get involved in writing the proposals that are presented to AID. You get a chance to do technical assignments. You do reconnaissance work. When you think that AID is going to be, let's say, launching a new horticultural project in Tanzania, the firm will send out people to do reconnaissance and to just to judge the landscape and to try to think ahead of time what AID is thinking. They have a jump on the competition in designing the proposal. The problem with working in these firms is it's not like a straight salary kind of situation. It's almost like working at a legal firm. You have to get your time is billed almost hourly every day to certain projects or to certain efforts on projects. So the whole key to having a stable career at these USAID consultancy firms is getting billed work, getting on a project. And when you're young and starting out, it's hard to do that because you want to get involved in the project, but the more senior people get on it before you. So it's kind of like you just eventually have to find a way to build up your experience base and be in more demand to be billed on these projects. So I don't know if I really made that clear, but it's extremely important. Later on, you can become like a project director. They call it a chief of party. These firms will also have technical area managers, so there'll be could be a horticulture or a small-scale irrigation specialist at these firms. Sometimes the firms are divided into regions, so you'll have one person who's just in charge of all the African projects, whether they be health projects or agricultural projects or democracy projects. There's different types of positions you can get in these firms as you get more experience. But the important thing is to get on a project and get billed. Then you've got to, if the firm wins that particular project, then you've got a job, a secure job for the 5-year length of the project. Then after that, you have to look for the next project to get billed to. But in order to just get in the game, you have to get on the consultancy rosters of these projects so that these firms have your name, they have your CV, and they can pick you when they're building proposals in the first place. Here I was going to explain kind of a typical contractor-led project. This was a project led by DAI. It was an agribusiness project, a regional project. It was based in Washington, but the idea was to support USAID agribusiness activities working out of the field offices in about 6 Asian countries. Just to try to explain what this project did, in Nepal, AID knew that they were going to essentially put out a bid for a big horticulture project in the following year, and they needed a project to essentially do a baseline survey of horticulture consumption before they put the project into place. And then when the project was implemented, awarded to somebody, then maybe 2 years into the project, they would do another survey work on horticulture to essentially compare it to the baseline. So they needed a firm to go in and do this baseline survey in the middle of the Rapti zone in Nepal on small vegetable consumption at household level. This was the project area, Tulsipur in the Rapti zone, and the whole idea was mainly to deliver more vitamin A to the villagers, through vegetable production. And if you look, this was mainly, essentially trying to improve the health of women and children. If you look at most of these children, they seem in pretty good shape, but if you can look more closely, you see their distended bellies, and they have real significant nutrition problems that heavier doses of vegetables can really help out on. So essentially, this project was in place. This project led by the contractor DAI, and it essentially then went into the mission asked the project to design a baseline survey before this big horticultural project went into place. So our team went there. We hired local, enumerators and survey firms to essentially do household income surveys in the target area where this new big project would soon be active. Did food consumption surveys through food recall of what kind of vegetables they were consuming. Nutrition, anthropometric measuring, height, weight, stunting, this kind of thing. And we also did vegetable promotion. And so this was essentially a service provided by a contractor-led project. And we had to essentially hire, subcontractors to help us do the work in Nepal. We had to find local NGOs that could help us work comfortably in the villages and do the kind of nutrition survey work. So just a key learning on working as a USAID contractor. USAID relies highly on external implementers to get their work done. There's kind of an us and them reality between USAID personnel and the contracting personnel. The contractors often feel that they're kind of considered second-class citizens at times, and they have these USAID overlords. But what they don't realize is the AID officers, the ones who are designing the projects, relying upon the contractors to implement the projects, we highly depend upon the contractors to do this on the ground work. We don't have the time, we don't have the manpower. We don't see the contractors so much as just kind of simple implementers of the work. They are our eyes and ears on the ground, and we have a high degree of respect for the kind of work that they do. You have to have, if you want to work at one of these contractors competing for USAID work, you have to have excellent writing skills, you have to be highly organized, you have to know how AID thinks, and trust me, the contractors are very driven and have a high degree of passion to improve the livelihoods of people in developing countries. Now I'm quickly going to talk about working for USAID. I think most of you are aware that we're part of the State Department. We have essentially 3 Ds in development: defense, diplomacy, and defense of foreign policy. 3 Ds: defense, diplomacy, and development. And AID is the development branch. We operate in sectors such as economic growth, democracy and government and governance, health. Our funding comes from Congress, and we have oversight from Congress, but technically we are part of the State Department, and the AID administrator reports to the Secretary of State. Present in over 100 countries. In order to become a USAID project officer, like me, there's various entry-level points. You can enter the Foreign Service. You can get appointments at USAID or in the State Department through the Foreign Service. If you're born in a foreign country and don't have U.S. citizenship, you can enter USAID service as a Foreign Service national. We've had in the recent past this DLI program, which is a fast fast-track mechanism for foreign service officers to get into USAID. You can also work, we have interagency agreements called PASs, where you become a USAID project officer through an arrangement with USDA. And then we have a whole series of fellowships, AAAS fellowships, Jefferson Science fellowships, Franklin fellowships, Presidential Management Fellows, Global Health Fellows. Those fellowships generally require a PhD level at least. And I just want to stress this one program, very few people know about it. It's called the Mdf Advisor Program. Here you can get work on a USAID project if you're in the middle of a master's program, like an MBA or a master's in international relations, that kind of thing. You can compete for it, and then you get placed on a USAID project overseas. And you essentially do USAID project work, and you complete that as part of your master's. And these other fellowships generally require PhD levels, and then the Jefferson Science Fellow it's more or less of a mid-career appointment. You have to be quite well established in your background. The AAAS fellows are generally recently graduated PhDs with very little international experience. And it's highly competitive, but our research and science office depends highly upon these fellows for work. We rely upon these fellows to essentially provide us a fresh insight from the world of science. They're recently graduated PhDs, postdocs, and do a lot of our project work currently in our research office. Well, I've kind of run out of time here. Yeah, why don't I just stop there, and so we at least do have some time for questions. I had a lot more to talk about, but kind of ran out of time.